A question from the Honourable Member for Charlottetown Parkdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In PEI, clients seeking social assistance must liquidate all financial assets, that's assets excluding things like a house or a car or RESPs, for example, all financial assets greater than $50 to be eligible to apply for short-term assistance, and any assets greater than $200 to apply for long-term assistance. After their assets have been reduced to those levels, they are then told that they are expected to take advantage of opportunities that will lead towards or establish financial self-sufficiency. At the same time, the programme objectives clearly state that the programme shall provide timely and appropriate services to prevent social dependency. A question to the Minister of Family and Human Services: how do you reconcile the programme's stated goals with the requirements that applicants must be utterly destitute before they can apply?
The Honourable Minister of Family and Human Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We believe in the power and potential of every human being, and ending poverty is going to start with seeing the potential and the power in people, Mr. Speaker. When I was appointed 2 years ago, I took an undertaking to review all of our social programs, Mr. Speaker. We started with the Child Protection Act review. We went on to the Disability Support Review. Child Care Subsidy Review was then reviewed, Mr. Speaker. And we are currently undertaking a collaborative and comprehensive review of our social assistance program, Mr. Speaker. And I look forward, Mr. Speaker, to very shortly being able to roll out some of those changes that we've made. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Charlottetown Parkdale, your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. PEI has the lowest financial asset exemption levels in Canada. In Newfoundland and Labrador, the eligibility level is $3,000, and in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, the level is $1,000. A question for the Minister of Family and Human Services: how can you say that you're caring for the most vulnerable islanders while refusing to help anyone who has more than $50 to their name?
The Honourable Minister of Family and Human Services.
Mr. Speaker, to look at one aspect of a program and determine that that is how the whole program works, Mr. Speaker, we are working very hard, Mr. Speaker, with many of our clients that are facing multiple barriers, Mr. Speaker. We deal with them in a compassionate and caring way, Mr. Speaker, and we have made several investments, Mr. Speaker. This budget alone is historic in comparison to what has been done in this department over the many, many years, Mr. Speaker. This department is transforming, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to stand here today. I'm proud of the investments that we have made in this department, Mr. Speaker, and I couldn't have done it without each and every one of my colleagues on this side of the House that believe in this department, Mr. Speaker. And we will see changes, and we are seeing changes, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The Honourable Member for Charlottetown Parkdale, your second supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I am very disappointed to the Minister that you did not address this disparity among the Atlantic provinces in your most recent budget. After all, the economy is on a tear. Minister, will you commit to reviewing the exemption levels and increasing the rate to at least $1,000?
The Honourable Minister of Family and Human Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it does give me great pleasure to rise on my feet, Mr. Speaker, and address that, Mr. Speaker, which I did in the when I answered the first question, Mr. Speaker. We are reviewing our programs, Mr. Speaker. We will be rolling out some details in the coming weeks and coming months, Mr. Speaker. But take a look at our budget, Mr. Speaker, and a historic budget when it comes to caring for those islanders who have less than most, Mr. Speaker. We have made investments in free tuition for low-income island students, Mr. Speaker. We've increased the shelter budget, Mr. Speaker, $17 million that we will invest over the next 2 years for housing, Mr. Speaker. These are all things that are done in collaboration and in combination with other programs, Mr. Speaker. Just to single out one investment and to say...
that's enough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Next question will be from the Honourable Member for Charlottetown Parkdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So social assistance income support recipients, of whom there are over 3,700 families in PEI, are encouraged and supported to work. Yet when they do find employment, almost every dollar of their social assistance income is clawed back, leaving them in perpetual poverty. In fact, single clients are only allowed to keep the first $75 of any money they earn every month and 10% of any subsequent earnings each month. A question for the Minister of Family and Human Services. How does clawing back their earnings encourage and empower islanders on social assistance to move out of programme dependency?
The Honourable Minister of Family and Human Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad that the honourable member feels that she knows the program so well, Mr. Speaker. Maybe she might want to take a look at the pilot project that we launched last year, Mr. Speaker, the Harvest and Prosper pilot project, Mr. Speaker, that was directed to our social assistance clients, Mr. Speaker. We went out, Mr. Speaker, and we collaborated with our partners in Workforce and Advanced Learning and in Ag and Fish, Mr. Speaker. And we had 20 or 30 of our social assistance clients that went out there to work, Mr. Speaker. They received life coaching, Mr. Speaker. They received training. They received work clothes if they needed it, and transportation, and they were allowed to earn up to $3,000, Mr. Speaker, without 1 cent being clawed back. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member, Charlottetown Parkdale, this is your first supplementary and your second question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So if 30 clients have received that fantastic support, that leaves 3,670 who didn't. According to the Canada Social Report, Welfare in Canada 2016, which I'll be tabling later, PEI has the lowest clawback threshold. A question for the Minister of Family and Human Services: when has government last reviewed these clawback levels?
The Honourable Minister of Family and Human Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This year.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Charlottetown Parkdale, your second supplementary.
Perhaps since that review is happening this year, we can look to both Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, who have some of the lowest clawback levels, which are still higher than ours, at $150 and 30% of remaining wages. I look forward to hearing from the Minister. Perhaps you could advise us when this year we'll be hearing about that increase in rates.
The Honourable Minister of Family and Human Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And when we have the details, Mr. Speaker, I would be pleased to stand in the House and release those, Mr. Speaker. But we have been working hard behind the scenes, Mr. Speaker. We have an Exemptions and Exceptions Committee, Mr. Speaker, that are dealing with our clients on a one-on-one basis, Mr. Speaker. So if somebody approaches us and they have something over and above what their need might be directed under policy, we take that and we look at it and we say, is this something that government should be involved in? And if it is, we take care of it. We take care of our clients, Mr. Speaker. We are working hard to make sure that they live the best and successful life that they can, Mr. Speaker, and we are removing barriers that are attaching them to the workforce. It's not all just about income, Mr. Speaker. There are many, many variables when it comes to poverty and our clients, and we are dealing with them, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.